What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so continuing our Spider-Man week coverage, we pick up with the Ultimate Spider-Man and the origin of Miles Morales is the best way to say it. Miles Morales appeared before this particular origin, but he was really just kind of like a kid who was there, and that was really about it. And this is interesting because this brings in really to like Spider-Man Homecoming, the idea of Miles Morales. This video is being made 2 weeks before Spider-Man Homecoming, so I have no idea what goes on in that movie. But I would surmise that Miles Morales will probably appear in the movie, but either he'll be a post-credit scene or he'll just be a kid who's mentioned, and that'll be about it. And the reason why that works is because of the fact that that's what happened in the Ultimate Universe. This whole origin came after Miles Morales first appeared. Prior to this, he was just a kid who was there, and that was really it. There was no expectation that he was going to grow into anything or become anything significant. And it was kind of interesting because, to me, there are a lot of aspects of Spider-Man Homecoming that pull directly from the Ultimate Universe. And it's always been that way with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is rooted more in the Ultimate Universe than it is in the main Marvel continuity. There's some differences. I mean, there are some main Marvel timeline things that are folded in. For example, Captain America Steve Rogers is the first super soldier in the main Marvel universe, but he's not the first super soldier in the Ultimate Universe. And that actually brings us in to the story of Miles Morales' origin. And the reason why is because of the fact that all of this basically deals with Norman Osborn and Osborn Industries, as well as something called the Oz Formula. Now, the Oz Formula is just one of several attempts in the Ultimate Universe to basically duplicate the original super soldier serum that made Nick Fury. And this is one of the biggest differences when it came to the Ultimate Universe and the main Marvel Universe. With regards to the main Marvel continuity, you have what's called Weapons Plus. And Weapons Plus is basically just this organization that serves the purpose of creating super soldiers to battle against credible threats. The idea was that Captain America Steve Rogers was Weapon 1. That was it. But because of the fact that Dr. Abraham Erskine, the guy that was behind the formula that made Steve Rogers into a super soldier, had basically been killed, it was impossible to duplicate his formula perfectly. And so the idea was to try to attempt it, but if it didn't work, to also have backup projects instead. And so what we got were projects 2 through 9. And that was everything from implanting cybernetic implants in animals, trying to make animals sentient. It was a multitude of just different things that all had to do with creating super soldiers. Eventually it led into Weapon 10 or Weapon X, which gave us Wolverine, which led into Deadpool and all different kinds of stuff. But all of it was rooted in the idea of Captain America Steve Rogers. In the Ultimate Universe, it's a wholly different kettle of beans. The way it all worked out is that instead of Steve Rogers, Nick Fury was the very first super soldier. But much like Captain America Steve Rogers in the main Marvel Universe, the entire basis behind the super soldier serum had basically gone up in smoke. Nobody really knew how to replicate it. But what ended up happening is different organizations across the world began attempting to duplicate it. Of course, in Canada, for example, they were trying to duplicate the process that made Nick Fury into a super soldier, and that resulted in them kidnapping James Howlett and discovering the X gene, which meant that if these X genes were basically unlocked or they were accessed, people would be granted powers. And so once they accessed the powers of James Howlett, then they in turn turned this formula or what have you into an aerosol form, dispersed it across the world, and that's how mutants started popping up. When it came to Norman Osborn and the Oz formula, that was based off the super soldier formula that was used to make Nick Fury into a super soldier. And so the idea was that Norman Osborn was trying to find a way to again create super soldiers, and in doing so began the process of irradiating spiders and so on and so forth. One of these spiders bit Peter Parker, which led to the start of the Ultimate Spider-Man line of stories. Now, that deals with the idea of mutants and most of the superpowered community. The idea was that in the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, Peter Parker had just gone forward, as a superhero, and he was learning about his powers. With great power must come great responsibility that he was taught by Uncle Ben. Fast forwarding over the course of his publication history, once we got into 2011, 2012, writer Brian Michael Bendis wanted to shift things up. He wanted to basically remove Peter Parker and put somebody in his place. The fact remains here that in the instance of Peter Parker effectively getting away, the idea of Osborn was to basically figure out what it was about the formula that gave Peter Parker powers in the first place and then duplicate it. Now, of course, this all dead ends into the idea of Norman Osborn being revealed as the Green Goblin and so on and so forth. But then we actually pick up with a guy by the name of Prowler. Now, in the main Marvel line of stories, Prowler is a guy named Hobie Brown. And you may have heard of his line of comics. He got his own solo series as part of All New, All Different Amazing Spider-Man's Clone Conspiracy. Really, the biggest role that Hobie Brown plays in all all new, all different Marvel, is he's the stand-in Spider-Man. When Peter Parker is, holding a press conference or when he's in the middle of a meeting or something like that, Hobie Brown is the one that parades around as Spider-Man so that people believe that Peter and Spider-Man are two distinctly different people. Here in this Ultimate Universe line of stories, he's basically just the uncle of Miles Morales. He's just a guy. And they call him Prowler because he's basically just a guy that steals stuff. But breaking into Osborn Industries has its own risks in the sense that you're basically breaking into a multinational corporation. Not only that, in the middle of this heist, the spider manages to make its way onto Prowler, which in turn enters his bag, taking this spider with him. Now, from here, we pick up with Miles Morales. And that's one of the things that I like the most about Miles, is that Miles, the way his story was told, the way it was done by Brian Michael Bendis, he was designed to basically be a character that reflected the real world. And most of the Ultimate Universe was like that. The Ultimate Universe was Marvel coming along and saying, okay, how can we take these characters that everybody knows and everybody loves and update them for the modern day so they could basically get an answer to the question, what if Captain America emerged right now? That was the whole basis behind the Ultimate Universe back when it was made in the year 2000. And so the idea is that Miles Morales is basically in a lottery for a charter school. There was a good documentary that was done a while ago called Waiting for Superman. At least either it's Waiting for Superman or Waiting on Superman. But the idea was that it dealt with like the American school system. And something that a lot of you guys may not know is that in a lot of like inner city schools and really impoverished parts of the country, you'll have like the public school system, and then they'll open a charter school, which is like where you can get the best education in that particular school district. And they'll hold lotteries. Like people will go to like these huge assembly halls and they'll basically start drawing numbers. And those kids who were selected get to go to that charter school. The others are just left to deal with the American school system. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, if they win and they get to go to a charter school, they'll have a future outside of whatever education they get from the American school system being as defunded as it is. So it's not really designed to be like a political statement. It's designed to make Miles Morales relatable. And that's one of the things that I kind of feel like needs to be said, especially right now in Marvel, because a lot of people are looking at the whole, political landscape and so on and so forth. This was written back in 2011. And so while Brian Michael Bendis does have a tendency to be a little political with his writing, this was not designed to be a statement. It was basically designed to say, here's a relatable aspect of Miles Morales, because there are kids that deal with this every day of their life in inner city areas. So again, it's kind of cool here because as a kid who is part Hispanic, part African American, it really related to a lot of young people who were reading his comics because that really feeds into the nature of Spider-Man. Keep in mind, Peter Parker's legacy was formed by the fact that he basically empowered teenagers. He made young people feel like they were the star of the show. And that legacy of Spider-Man lives on because you get a little bit of the humor, but you also get that whole backstory in terms of everything that happened that made him who he was. And so with Miles Morales winning this, we're basically introduced to the idea of his uncle. Miles does not know about the role that his uncle plays in being a thief. For him, his uncle is just an uncle. And so it's really just kind of Miles relaying the news and that kind of thing. But the funny scenario about this too is that Miles was really told in a lot of ways, do not go see your uncle. His father had explicitly laid that out. Do not go see him on the regular. He is not a good influence. Now, of course, again, the whole idea of a thief, but we'll actually learn there's a little more about Miles' dad than we were originally given. There's a little bit of an expansion here. But of course, in the middle of all this, he's basically bitten by the radioactive spider that his uncle had carried home and then suddenly just wakes up. Now, of course, with Miles' dad coming home, screaming at it, at his brother and that kind of thing, Miles basically just takes off. Now, this is when we start to get into a lot of the aspects of Spider-Man Homecoming, just kind of going by the trailers, just looking at what we've seen, with regards to the trailers. And the whole idea here is that Spider-Man Homecoming looks as though it's just supposed to be rooted in like the modern day. It's supposed to be rooted in a lot of like current things that go on right now, again, sort of feeding into this Ultimate Universe thing. But the introduction of it all really kind of comes by way of Miles' whole experience and learning that he has powers. The other half of this is that when Brian Michael Bendis made Miles Morales, had he gone through and made Miles just a total replica of Peter Parker, it would have cheapened it. It would have taken away the impact of Miles being Spider-Man. With Miles, one of the biggest issues that he faces is a combination of just kind of growing up, as being a teenager, and also the idea of having powers. Because remember, one of the relatable aspects of this is just teenage life. And I don't know about you guys, I don't know how many of you guys watching this are teenagers, but being a teenager, it's in hindsight, it's the easiest thing in the world. But at the time when you are a teenager, it seems like the hardest thing in the world because you're trying to make friends, you're trying to be socially acceptable, you also want to be able to drive around and have your own independence, but you also recognize you're not necessarily ready for the world, but you think you are. There's a million things that go on in your head. There's college, there's your future, there's a million things rolling around in your head, to say nothing of the fact that you're basically spending, 5 or 6 years going through an existential crisis. Who are you? Where are you going? What's your purpose in the universe? These are all the things that teenagers deal with on a regular basis. And so this combined with the idea of the sudden introduction of powers makes things a little difficult. Now, the other half of this is a character by the name of Genki. And this is really the whole idea of like Ned Leeds' character being brought in to Spider-Man Homecoming. One of the funny situations and one of the things that fans immediately caught on when it came to the trailer of Spider-Man Homecoming is the character of Ned Leeds. Historically speaking, in the Peter Parker Spider-Man line of stories in the main Marvel universe, Ned Leeds was like a competitor at the Daily Bugle. He was never a classmate of Peter Parker. With this introduction of Ned Leeds in Spider-Man Homecoming, it's basically Genki from the Ultimate Universe in the sense that the two of them relate to each other in the exact same way. Genki's kind of like the comedic sidekick. He's the kid who sort of cheers Spider-Man on, cheers Miles Morales on and says, look, man, like, you're capable of incredible things. But it's also the idea that Genki is going to be the moral compass for Miles Morales in a lot of different ways. But it's kind of cool because instead of just like being terrified, instead of being afraid, it's this idea that Miles could achieve something pretty incredible with the powers that he has. And so in the middle of this whole conversation that he has, with Genki, he's basically pulled aside by his father, taken to a local park, and his father basically explains the reason why he doesn't want Miles spending time with his uncle is because of the fact that his uncle's a thief. And that's one of the greatest things about this particular story is because with Peter Parker Spider-Man in the main Marvel universe, it's, well, Uncle Ben died, and then with great power must come great responsibility, and the moral lessons that came with that. With Miles Morales, it's a lot more visceral. It's this idea that his father basically made a lot of bad decisions. His father stole at one point in time. His father served time in jail somewhere along the line. For him, he looks at his son Miles and says, you've just been accepted to a charter school. You have a future. You can get out of this place. But this also creates a bit of a contradiction with Miles himself, because in his mind, in his imagination, he sees himself being Spider-Man. He sees himself crawling on walls, which he inevitably does. He sees himself saving the day. And that's one of the interesting things about this story is because, once he goes and visits, Genki and kind of tells him everything that's going on, kind of expands on the idea that he can crawl on walls and so on and so forth. And once he actually travels, alongside Genki and comes across a fire in a building, this creates the kind of inner debate, with Miles Morales between what his father's teaching him and what he's coming to understand on his own. His father's looking at the big picture, but his father doesn't know that Miles has spider powers. So in the mind of Miles' father, it's, here's my son who lives in a pretty rough part of town, who's just been accepted to a school that will get him a future. Think of all the things that he could do. He'd become a lawyer or a doctor or a businessman or something along those lines. In the mind of Miles Morales, with the powers that he has, he can save people on the ground level. And that is the inherent difference between what it is that Miles' father's teaching him and what Miles can become. Miles' father is talking about playing a much bigger role, playing a much larger role. But when you're Spider-Man, when you are on the ground floor, when you're saving somebody from a burning building, you don't say, well, hey, we're passing some laws and it's going to make people's life better, and it does. Instead, you see their faces, you see their immediate reactions, you get thank yous, you get, wow, I can't believe you pulled that off. You get the adoration of a community that comes to respect you as you're able to do things that make their lives tangibly better. That's the coolest thing about that, is because it makes it more personal. And so the struggle that Miles faces is that where he does rescue a kid from a burning building, suddenly the gravity of the situation begins to hit him, because now he realized he just saved a human life. And what that means is people will look at him and they will say, wow, that guy's a superhero. Man, that kid's amazing. I can't believe he pulled that off. But now Miles has to come to the realization that the life of other people is in his hands. What if he hadn't acted? That little girl probably would have burned to death in that building. But with Miles Morales stepping in and saving her life, then the question becomes, well, what about the lives that he inevitably just can't save? What if there's just not enough time for him to get there? What about the person who's being mugged or being attacked that he doesn't know about? How does all that play into the equation? Peter Parker Spider-Man in the main Marvel universe deals with that by realizing that while he tries to save everybody he cannot save everyone. You can't be everywhere at once. It's one of the reasons why Superior Spider-Man was so cool, because he was everywhere at once. He had eyes all throughout the entire city. But with Miles Morales, he's coming to realize that you can't be everywhere at one time. You can't save everyone. There are some people out there that you just can't do anything with. And so what we end up doing is we basically pick up with the moment by which Peter Parker ends up dying in the Ultimate Universe. And again, this was a pretty big moment in the whole Ultimate Spider-Man story, just because you got to remember, the Ultimate Universe was basically launched with Peter Parker Spider-Man. And so for about a decade or so, if you were reading Ultimate Spider-Man, you were reading Peter Parker. And the way that he went out was actually pretty amazing. It was like this battle with Norman Osborn, and he basically fought to the point that he died. It was almost like this Superman-esque scenario where it was basically just like a battle to the death. But in the midst of all this, what it does is it basically sets the groundwork for Peter Parker to be removed from the entire Spider-Man mythos, and it allows Miles Morales to effectively take his place. Now, something to point out here is that with Miles being on the scene and directly, speaking with Gwen Stacy really just kind of in a moment of mourning, sort of spits out the name of Peter Parker. But what it does is it basically kind of lights this fire in Miles Morales, because with Miles Morales seeing everything happen, when he sees the death of Peter Parker, he really just kind of looks at this and says, well, now it's up to me to do something. His discussion with Genki is, look, I didn't get these powers, even if that got him by chance. I have to believe if anybody had these powers, they would put them to use. They would live up to the legacy as it was created by Spider-Man. They would live up to everything it was that he did, that Peter Parker had effectively done. And so in the mind of Miles, that's when he begins to really understand what it is that he's meant to do, the significance of the role that he plays in being Spider-Man. Because going to the funeral of Peter Parker, speaking with Aunt May, speaking with Gwen Stacy, it's basically this question that he asks: why did he become Spider-Man? What was the motivation of it? And this is the beauty of this, because Gwen Stacy immediately, as angry as she is, goes and basically says he did everything that he did because his uncle instilled in him, with great power must come great responsibility. Those with the power to act have the responsibility to act. And that is one of the reasons why the Spider-Man mythos has always been so great, and one of the reasons why it's so important. When it comes to different superheroes over the years, they all have their own moral compasses, their own motivations for why it is they do the things they do. With Superman, it was this idea that he was taught by Jonathan and Martha Kent: if you have the power to stop crime, you should stop crime. In some form or fashion, it was always this measure of responsibility. But with the infamous phrase, with great power must come great responsibility, it made it tangible. We've all heard that, right? Like, do the right thing even if no one is watching, or something along those lines. We've all had that moral compass instilled in us. But to have Gwen Stacy say this to Miles Morales in this way, it lights a fire in Miles Morales, because he's just like, that's true. It's an honest statement. I have these abilities. And so in his mind, while he goes through and designs his own little Spider-Man suit, the idea is, I have to keep the memory of Spider-Man going. And this is actually one of the first mistakes that he makes, because what they do is they grab a Spider-Man Halloween costume and he immediately takes to the streets. Now, this is one of those things where it's just too early, bro. It's just way too early. Despite Miles Morales wanting to do the right thing, his heart's in the right place, the mistake that he makes is that everybody looks at him as trying to be like a copycat of Spider-Man. But people are still in the mourning phase. You got to keep in mind, with the idea of Spider-Man losing such a hero in such a tragic way, people aren't ready to see somebody just suddenly take up the mantle. They're not ready to see somebody just suddenly become Spider-Man. What they want is time to grieve. What they want is time to mourn. And once that time has passed, then they'll be ready for somebody to take up the mantle. And so at this point, it's just too much, too fast. And so in the middle of this whole experience that he has running around the streets dressed as Spider-Man, he's basically met with the arrival of Jessica Drew. Now, Jessica Drew is actually a pretty interesting character in the realm of Marvel Comics. And the reason why is because she originally appeared in Marvel Spotlight in 1977, I think it was. And she was actually a character who basically gained her spider powers by way of a direct injection from her father. And it was really just a weird circumstance. It was essentially that she had just been, irradiated by uranium that was, across the land and so on. And her father basically tried to cure her of her uranium poisoning by injecting her with a serum that was composed of different spiders, and then putting her in this sort of evolution chamber that was created by the high evolutionary who messed around with the evolution of animals and stuff like that. She woke up something like decades later and basically just kind of emerged with no idea who she was, and eventually joined Hydra or something like that. But with the Ultimate Universe, it's a wholly different kettle of beans. And so Jessica Drew in the Ultimate Universe is actually a clone of Peter Parker. And that's one of the interesting things, is because with her character, despite people knowing who she wasn't so significant in the realm of Marvel Comics that they kind of had to tiptoe around and be careful about what they did. She wasn't Captain America, she wasn't Thor, she wasn't like Iron Man or anything like that. And so because of that, it offered Marvel a little bit of leeway in terms of what they did with her character, how they wrote her, how they designed her, so on and so forth. Also because of the fact that the Clone Saga from Marvel Comics was not a very well-received story for a lot of people. And so the idea of going back and reworking it in the Ultimate Universe was actually kind of cool. It was actually pretty interesting. But with her confronting Miles Morales, this comes by way of the fact that she was basically told by Nick Fury, there's somebody out there impersonating Spider-Man. That happened within, a wholly separate line of stories, but the fact remains that with Nick Fury basically being the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and then essentially having all this information on the life and times of Miles, the cool thing is that there's a conversation that takes place between the two of them, where Nick Fury basically says, look, I know your heart's in the right place. I know you're trying to do the right thing, but people are not ready for a new Spider-Man yet. Give them time. Give them a little bit of time. They'll come around. But for right now, all they see you as is a cheap knockoff because you're wearing the exact same uniform that Spider-Man wore. So if you are going to be Spider-Man, if you're going to be a superhero, then you've got to be different. You can't just be Peter Parker, you've got to be your own character. And that was kind of like an in-comic book statement by Brian Michael Bendis, effectively saying Miles Morales is his own character. He's wholly different from Peter Parker. They're two distinctly different characters. And that was one of the interesting things, is because again, it was hitting home at the idea that he'd basically sort of gone away. And so what ended up happening is that, you know, of course, with Electro, Maxwell Dillon basically being one of the most notable villains of the Ultimate Spider-Man, making his escape, Miles Morales is single-handedly responsible for basically being able to bring him down. Now, the Ultimates are there, you know, the Ultimate Universe Avengers are there and they do what they can, but it's really Miles Morales that pulls it off through a combination of his ability to make himself invisible and the fact that he issues this sort of electrical touch whenever it is that he engages somebody. Now, the reason why that works is because what it does is it basically sends the electrical impulses of Electro into overdrive and really just sort of hyperdrives him and then just shuts him down. He's basically overwhelmed by his own powers. But, you know, with him being shot dead by Nick Fury as a way to kind of curtail his character a little bit, what happens is it's basically Miles Morales showing the Ultimates that he's actually pretty legit. You know, he's got what it takes to not only be a member of the team, but to also stand on his own 2 feet as his own superhero. Now, at this point, he's not part of the Ultimate Avengers yet. I mean, he hasn't really been rolled in as part of the ranks just because, 1, he doesn't have the experience, and 2, they just don't know enough about him. But the first step to allowing the Ultimates to gain more information about him, to see what he's about, is, you know, really comes by way of Nick Fury, who presents Miles Morales with an actual Spider-Man costume based on Miles' own designs. When he was just kind of drawing up these little versions of his own costume, when he was trying to figure out what he was going to look like, Nick Fury basically used S.H.I.E.L.D.'s resources, found this design, I don't know, broke into his home, I have no clue, but took this costume, made it real, and gave it to Miles and said, now go forward and be your own superhero. With that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. I love Miles Morales Spider-Man. He's one of my favorite characters, one of my absolute favorite characters in the realm of comics. And for the next 5 years or so, really maybe even 4 years, it just kind of continued on with his own line of stories, going into Secret Wars and then coming out, going into all new, all different Marvel. But the story with like his mom and everything, it's some pretty great stuff. But anyway, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.